Biden makes his move. The Russian president declared 2 regions of eastern Ukraine independent this week and then invaded the country. Explosions and air raid sirens were heard in Ukraine's 2 largest cities. And here's some of the damage left after an attack in eastern Ukraine. Is this the start of a major military escalation? Will Putin send bombers and boots on the ground throughout the country? Is the Biden administration responding appropriately? Bradley Bowman is Senior Director of the Center for Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's with us now to provide some insights. So, Brad, good to have you with us. I'm sure Putin already calculated the cost of sanctions to the Russian oligarchs and to his country. Apparently, the threat of them was not enough.
You know, in the world of strategy, when we think of a threat, there's really 2 elements to that. One is military capability, and the second is political will. Military capability, well, he's for months now assembled roughly 190,000 combat and combat service support troops in and around Ukraine. So he has the capability to launch a military attack unlike anything we've seen since World War II. And all that is left is political will. And he's already demonstrated the political will to yet again violate international borders. And I think going back to that famous Lenin quote, it's the doctrine of the bayonet. He's going to push until he hits something hard. And the hard thing for the last 7 years has been NATO. Of course, Ukraine's not a NATO member. And so I see, I worry that, as you suggest, he's discounted sanctions. He assumes he's going to get hit hard with sanctions that will probably escalate. But I think he has an eye on history, and he thinks that the cost-benefit analysis makes that suffering worth it in light of what he hopes to achieve in Ukraine.
Donald Trump says President Biden's response has made Putin and Russia wealthier because of the jump in the price for oil and natural gas. So what do you think about the way Biden has responded to Putin's moves along the border and now into parts of eastern Ukraine? Can we trust Biden on this?
I think President Biden, I really do try to call balls and strikes on these things. And I really do think Biden has done a lot right. And there's some I've been critical of. I think the Biden administration was slow in beginning to send weapons to Ukraine. The indications and warnings that something like this was coming emerged early last year and were clear for all to see in the October-November timeframe. And yet the Biden administration was slow in sending our American weapons to them and authorizing partners in Europe to send U.S. origin equipment to Ukraine. But they now have authorized that. We've had more than 8 shipments. It's not enough. It's belated. I'd send more. But, I give them points for that. That's certainly more than the Obama administration did. But I would just encourage my fellow Americans right now, really try to put the partisanship aside. Let's think and act as Americans, and let's be more critical of an authoritarian thug than our own president.
Well, I've got to get a little political here because I know some conservatives who watch this show believe Biden is trying to act tough against Russia because his job approval ratings tanked after the Afghanistan withdrawal. He's got to look tough. Also because of his domestic troubles, mainly inflation, the economy, so forth. So is this a wag the dog scenario, a red herring?
As someone who taught American politics at West Point as well as foreign policy and grad strategy and served in the U.S. Army and the U.S. Senate, I understand the connections between domestic policy and domestic standing in polls and foreign policy. And I published a piece last week talking about how Biden, perceptions of Biden's weakness may result in a really poor Iran deal. So if it plays in the Iran space, of course it plays in the Russia space. But I'd say let's just be careful among Americans, and particularly some on the right, not to unwittingly be echoing talking points from the Kremlin, right? Ukraine is not the aggressor. NATO is not Napoleon. NATO is not Nazi Germany threatening Russia. As the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, this is entirely fabricated by Vladimir Putin because he resents the fall of the Soviet Union and he wants to take a big chunk of Ukraine. Let's remember that 2 world wars started in Europe in less than 30 years, and those involved the violation of international boundaries. Yet again, we saw it in Georgia in 2008, we saw it in Crimea in 2014, and we've seen it in the Donbass since then. More than 14,000 have died. We see Vladimir Putin disregarding international borders, adopting a model of might makes right authoritarianism. I'm more powerful than Ukraine. I can tell you what to do and with whom to associate. And I think Americans shrug at our great peril there, because let's remember those 2 world wars I mentioned earlier. More than 100,000 Americans lost their lives in World War I, and more than 400,000 lost their lives in World War II. Our leading trading partners are there. Our leading allies are there. We have deep national security interests. And this is directly threatening core American interests, in my view.
And you know, there was a lot of talk earlier that Putin was dividing NATO, but it seems that just the opposite has taken place. The Germans have put certification of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline on hold, and the EU has imposed sanctions of its own. So what do you think? It seems like a united response so far.
I think, I've been a little bit critical of the Germans, who are, they're a valuable ally and an important member of NATO and a leading economy in Europe, geographically central, a fundamental player. I've been critical of their unwillingness to provide weapons to Ukraine, but their decision on Nord Stream 2, while belated, was certainly laudable. But yeah, and I mean, the two primary things that Vladimir Putin is complaining about, NATO expansion and U.S. military power in Eastern Europe, are the very things that his own actions are inviting. I mean, why has he attacked Georgia and Ukraine but not NATO members? Well, it's because they're NATO members. He's a wonderful advertisement for the value of NATO membership. And frankly, I would rather be sending U.S. military forces to shore up our defenses in the Indo-Pacific, but he's leaving us no choice but to have to shore up our forces in Eastern Europe. So the very things he's complaining about, his actions are inciting. And, people say, well, Russia has interests. Well, of course they have interests. They have legitimate national security interests, but that does not include invading and occupying other countries, period.
Okay, we'll see where all this heads. Bradley Bowman of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you, Brad, for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.